Welcome to the SR podcast. This is session number 1. Today's guest on the show is none other than Veena Pureshwaran. Veena has over 10 years' experience in the electronics industry and has held leadership positions in technology development, strategy and management. She's currently the global electronics leader at the IBM Institute for Business Value. And in this role, she leads a global research study on the future of the Internet of Things. The first report, which has just come out, is called Device Democracy, and this was released at the IFA Berlin in 2014 and was also demonstrated at the CES show in 2015. So I'm really excited to welcome Veena on the show today. Veena, thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure, thank you.
So Veena, I'm really interested. What's your background story? How did you come to be so interested in the Internet of Things, and how did this all come about?
So I have the most delightful job. I work at the Institute for Business Value, where I have the pleasure and the honor of leading a global research study on the future of the Internet of Things. The mission of my organization, the Institute for Business Value, is to produce thought leadership for the industry. And our horizon is typically 5 to 10 years out. So that's the lens through which we're looking at technologies and their business and economic impact. So when I started this study 2 years ago now, the IoT was already here. Connected things had existed around us for a while now. But what fascinated me the most is what happens when the IoT as it is today scales. What happens when there truly are 100 billion connected devices around us. Those actual numbers depends on whose forecast you're looking at and which analyst reports you're looking at. But one thing was certain, that there is going to be significant processing power, memory, and connectivity sitting on everything around us. And what challenges does that present? What's the greatest value in having all of these devices connected up? Those are the questions we set out to answer.
So, Device Democracy, I've read this report a few times, and it's absolutely fascinating for so many reasons. But it sounds like you guys at IBM, you've been thinking about this for a really long time already.
That's right. IBM itself has been thinking about and solving problems in the Internet of Things for years now. In fact, if you remember, IBM's Smarter Planet was among the earliest efforts to address what we describe as the instrumented, interconnected, intelligent world. And that's, I would say, more than 6 years ago now. Device democracy, however, it's sort of a vision for the future, right? It's a vision for how the IoT could evolve to be more self-sustaining and future-proof. So even today, we already have existing commercial IoT solutions at IBM. But device democracy is really a peek into the future. It's a vision for how we might want the IoT to evolve if we wanted it to be more cost-effective, more secure, and more self-sustaining as it scales to this vision of hundreds of billions of devices.
What does device democracy actually mean, do you think? And why is that term so important?
So the main concept of device democracy is the idea of shifting the power in the Internet of Things network from the center of the network to the edge of the network, which is to the devices or the owners and users themselves. So the premise here is that in the years to come, there will be a significant amount of compute power sitting on these devices that could be used to make them more intelligent and more autonomous. And by doing so, we build a network, an IoT network that's much more secure, that reduces the overall cost of operating the network itself and improves the longevity of the IoT.
I mean, with some of the research that you've done already, I mean, how would this be important then if you can liberate so much of this computing power and you can again augment some of the autonomy of these devices? How would that be so important to society and to business and etc.?
It's really important because it helps us augment existing IoT approaches. So most approaches today are centralized. Okay. So there is, some central authority, right? It could be the manufacturer or service provider, but there is some notion of centralization. This idea of device democracy helps us build around it and to just, so that instead shift the power from that center to the edge itself, and in doing so, create devices that are more autonomous. And when you make these devices autonomous, besides building a more robust and scalable network, it also opens up a host of other new and previously unthought of economic opportunities. These devices can potentially become points of economic transaction. They become capable of participating in marketplace transactions and could potentially become revenue-generating opportunities, which is where we describe this transformation in an upcoming paper as the economy of things. So the idea is that by introducing greater and greater autonomy at the device level itself, it opens up a whole new range of marketplace transactions and new economic opportunities.
So it's this idea of autonomy, basically, that you can actually liberate from these connected devices. This is really fascinating. So do you have any examples of where this could be implemented?
Certainly. I'll give you the two examples that we actually demonstrated. So the device democracy paper, as I described, was a vision, right? But some of the ideas introduced there are somewhat radical and thought-provoking and a little counter to the way we perceive transactions on the Internet of Things today. So we wanted to demonstrate feasibility of these ideas, so we built a proof of concept. And we took two sets of use cases that are representative of different types of transactions on the Internet of Things. And we actually built this proof of concept and then demonstrated in partnership with Samsung very recently at CES. And the two examples that we demonstrated were, one was a case of large format displays, so basically screens that you see around you, participating in a decentralized advertising marketplace. So the advertising marketplace, for instance, today is a very controlled, centralized type of environment, right? But this was an instance where these large format displays, which could be anywhere, they could be in an airport, in a restaurant, anywhere really, in a mall, all participate in this advertising marketplace and are able to share and display content and make secure payments for them. Everything on a completely decentralized peer-to-peer network, which means files are being shared between devices directly, payments are being made between devices directly. And in doing so, each of these displays essentially becomes a point of economic value, which is very, very counter to the way we think of devices and the Internet of Things today. And similarly, we took a consumer case where we demonstrated, in collaboration again with Samsung on a Samsung washer, how the washer can itself autonomously participate in a service marketplace. So it can detect, it has the intelligence to detect an upcoming part failure. It can identify a service contractor. It can make a payment for the part. It can check whether it's in warranty. If not, it can make a payment. All of this autonomously, right? So essentially that appliance or that device becomes a point of financial transactions, which is much more valuable than just your washing machine emailing you and telling you that your wash cycle is done. That's useful. That's convenient. But if you look at the business value in the Internet of Things, it's about enabling these devices to actually become points of economic value and enabling them to participate in marketplace transactions more autonomously.
I think certainly in all of the reading that I've done about this and the work that we've done on this, this certainly is the promise of the Internet of Things, that all of this kind of economic potential suddenly gets liberated, right? And these and these new kind of economies are just created, and this really is one of the large areas of potential of the Internet of Things. But again, one of my questions for you is, who's ultimately responsible then if devices in this vision of the future have their own autonomy? Who's responsible then for the decisions that these devices make?
So in our implementation, which is a very early proof of concept of this vision, when these devices participate in transactions, some of them are based on pre-existing contracts. So for instance, the appliance might have a pre-existing contract with a certain service provider, right? So it already exists. In other cases, the device to some extent decides based on the information that it has, right? For instance, let's say there isn't a pre-existing contract with a certain service provider. Other service providers in that marketplace can bid for a transaction with this washer, and the washer picks the best service provider based on that service provider's record and previous history. So a lot of this evolves by consensus in a network like this, right? So consensus plays a very large role in determining some of the decisions that these devices make if a pre-existing contract made by the owner or the user doesn't already exist.
Okay, that's great. So so you talked very briefly about the advertising sector and about just autonomously bidding for advertising in media space. But could you just talk in a bit of greater detail about the impact on business models from your perspective that the IoT will have?
So on a larger scale, the evolution of the IoT will shape our business model thinking in the future, right? Today, much of our thinking around business models is shaped by devices like mobile phones and tablets. And their longevity, their purpose, their function, everything is very different, right? For instance, those devices only last 2 years or under. But you expect an IoT piece of infrastructure, like, say, a building doorknob or a light switch, or even, a display that you set up to participate in a marketplace to last much longer and be supported much longer, right? So you find that some of these business models today quickly break down when you apply them to the IoT. So similarly, many business models today are built around expectations like software updates and apps, which is very unlikely in the IoT world. It's very, very unlikely that, customers or users are going to be paying for software updates to all of these IoT-enabled devices, right? There's also something unrealistic in the expectations from data and analytics in the IoT. Not all of this data is going to be valuable, and it's going to be really important to tease out and to understand where the real value of data in the IoT is. So I'm actually leading another study later this year on new business models for the IoT at the enterprise level. So we try to understand where the value of the IoT is for the firm, for the enterprise. At a more macro level, we're just finishing up this study described as the economy of things, where we're trying to unlock the potential of the IoT across industries. This work was done in collaboration with Oxford Economics, where we modeled the more macro, the macroeconomic effects of the IoT on 5 different industries. So that report will be will be out very soon. So definitely stay tuned for that report.
Leading on from some of the research that you've done with your team at IBM, what do you see as some of the challenges to scaling the Internet of Things?
The challenges, I think, are from a manufacturer's perspective, I think the number one challenge will be cost. I think manufacturers tend to underestimate the cost of infrastructure that will be required to maintain and support such a large number of devices. If you think about it, even something as simple as pushing a software update out to millions of devices, when you scale that, it's going to become cost prohibitive at some point, especially over a very long period of time. For users, on the other hand, I think privacy will remain the number one concern, the number one challenge. I think there is really no longer any trust in the internet, and the IoT only magnifies that problem.
Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Like what you say that there's no trust on the internet. Why do you think that?
Well, I think with any centralized system, for that matter, there's always a single point of failure, a risk that data could be compromised, a risk that a device in your home is collecting data and somebody has access to it that shouldn't be. So I think the goal of the Internet of Things should be able to put all that responsibility towards, or at least give the user the ability to prevent that from happening, right? So if I have a device in my home, I don't want it to be streaming information to somebody that shouldn't have access to it, whoever it is, whether it's the manufacturer or the service provider or the government or anybody else.
Yeah. So Veena, one thing I want to talk to you about is this thing called blockchain that anyone who does any serious reading about the Internet of Things would know about. And I was wondering if you could just kind of talk to us about blockchain and why it's so important to this vision of the future with the Internet of Things.
Certainly. So our research looked at ways to decentralize the Internet of Things to address some of these challenges of cost and privacy and scalability. And among the things that we looked at, the blockchain was one that really, really appealed to us for a number of reasons. So the blockchain, quite simply, is the technology platform at the heart of Bitcoin that enables the decentralized financial system that is Bitcoin. And really, it is the innovation underlying Bitcoin. But in the case of the IoT, it is what allows these things, these connected things, to authenticate each other, to create contracts with each other, to manage relationships between each other, etc. Right? And by providing this very distributed platform for coordination of devices, and by enabling them to perform these very basic IoT functions without the need for a centralized authority, without a need for our traditional notion of trust between devices, and at a very, very low transaction cost, it offers very fascinating possibilities for the Internet of Things.
Okay. So why is it so important then that the Internet of Things is decentralized? Because many people would say that the internet that we have at the moment is fine.
And I agree. I think the internet that we have at the moment is fine. The IoT solutions that we have today, for the most part, work. But as I mentioned, as the Internet of Things scales, and as we start approaching this era of hundreds of billions of devices, the cost of managing such a large network, the privacy implications that come with it, and the need to support these devices over such a long period of time, this idea of longevity and future-proofness of the IoT will drive a shift towards decentralization. And I think it's not, when I say decentralization, we're not actually talking about decentralization replacing centralization. I think there will be, in reality, commercial IoT systems will still need points of centralization, right? But I think it will evolve into a more hybrid model where decentralized Internet of Things solutions will augment existing centralized approaches. And the blockchain is one way of doing this. I'm sure there will be others that get a lot of attention in the next few years, and the IoT will evolve to be a more hybrid, centralized, decentralized system.
Okay. So I know that you and your team are working now on kind of how to create economic value from the Internet of Things. And these reports obviously they're not out yet, but is there anything that you can share with us today on just some ideas on how you think economic value can be created from the Internet of Things?
Certainly. So the premise of this study is that the Internet of Things allows us to create value out of physical assets that would just not otherwise be possible. So what the role that the IoT plays here is that it enables discoverability, usability, and payment for any physical asset. And in doing so, it unlocks all this excess unused capacity of these assets and improves, and in some cases even generates new revenue generating opportunities, right? So this is what I described as the liquefaction of the physical world. And this transformation is what we describe as the economy of things. So to study this in a more quantitative manner, we collaborated with Oxford Economics, and we identified 5 different case studies to analyze what the economic value of this transformation will be. So we studied the impact to commercial real estate across the United States, and we wanted to also study a more mobile asset. So real estate is sort of a more static asset, right? So we did a very similar analysis with trucking and haulage. So those 2 case studies were built around trying to understand how the IoT can help unlock capacity. Then we wanted to study how the Internet of Things allows us to manage and measure credit and risk in ways that have not existed before. So traditionally, credit and risk are managed in Western economies, but there isn't really a method of even measuring or managing them in many, many economies. So we studied the role of the IoT in managing credit and risk in South Africa and in Latin America. And then finally, we wanted to look at an industry that has not benefited from digitization as much purely because it doesn't lend itself well to PCs or mobile phones or tablets, and what happens when the physical elements of that industry are able to be connected up, like with sensors and the basic elements of the IoT. So we looked at a very interesting, very complex case of agriculture. So these 5 case studies are what we bring together in the Economy of Things paper that will be released in another month. So it's a very exciting piece of work, a very eye-opening piece of work.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And I know that our time's almost up, but where can people find out more about you and more about this Internet of Things project that you're working on?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn by my first name and last name. All of our papers will be available through the main device democracy page. So that's ibm.biz/device democracy. And the links to the new reports will be available there as soon as they're out. We will be having a proof of concept, a report on the proof of concept based on the device democracy paper, based on the work that we did with Samsung. That should be available from that page in March. The Economy of Things paper will also be available in the March-April timeframe. We're just finishing that one up. About mid-year, we expect to release a report based on our scalability studies of the Internet of Things, trying to get a more quantitative perspective on centralized versus decentralized systems. And the paper looking at business models for the enterprise will be available by the end of the year. So a very exciting pipeline of work lined up for us.
Brilliant. Well, look, and then I'm going to link to all of these papers as well in the show notes. So everyone who's kind of looking out for these papers, certainly you can come back here and you'll be able to find the links here. So Veena Pureshwaran, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So there you have it, everyone. I hope you all got something from that episode. Learning about the different ways that the Internet of Things can be built to incorporate and represent democratic values was absolutely fascinating. If you want to learn more about Veena and IBM's work on this, check out the show notes at semanticaresearch.com/blog. I hope that this episode has inspired you in some way, shape, or form. Until next time,